The Ford Motor Company and Henry Ford. Ford's beginnings were perfectly normal. He was born on a farm in what is now Dearborn, Michigan on July 30th, 1863. He learned about full-size steam engines by becoming friends with the men who ran them. He received his watch as a gift as a child, and he managed to take it all the way apart and then put it back together. This was an example of Ford demonstrating his mechanical ability in an early age. Ford could have chosen to follow in his father's footsteps and become a farmer, but the young Henry Ford was fascinated by machines and was willing to take risks to pursue that fascination. In 1879, he left the farm to become an apprentice at the Michigan Car Company, a manufacturer of railroad cars in Detroit. He returned home in 1882, but he did not farm. Instead, he operated and worked on steam engines used by farmers and occasionally worked in factories in Detroit. He also cut and sold timber from 40 acres of his father's land. In 1888, Ford married Clara Bryant, and in 1891 they moved to Detroit, where Henry had taken a part-time job as a night engineer for the Edison Electric Illuminating Company. Ford did not know a great deal about electricity, but he saw the job as an opportunity to learn. By 1896, Ford was the head engineer of the illuminating company. At this point in his life, with the help of new friends, Ford managed to create a self-propelled vehicle in 1986. In 1898, Ford created a second car, an upgrade. In this year, he also persuaded a group of people to help fund his project to create a business, to create horseless carriages that would be affordable and available to the normal person. Ford went through 3 car companies before creating the Ford Motor Company that we know today. The Ford Motor Company was launched in 1903 with $28,000 from investors. The company only created a few cars a day in its early years. Within the next 10 years, Ford modernized the assembly line in mass production. Ford was 39 years old when he founded his motor company. The Ford Motor Company would later in Henry's life and after his death go on to be one of the world's largest and most profitable companies. The Ford Motor Company is notable for being family-run and it still is to this day. First car to come from Ford was the Model A. In 1907, Ford was producing the Model N. It was a 4-cylinder and costed $600, and it was the best-selling car in the country at the time. Ford had a dream, though. He wanted a better, cheaper car that was more accessible to different people. In 1908, Ford created the first engine with a removable cylinder head, the Ford Model T. It was easy to operate, maintain, and drive. It was immediately a huge success, and Ford would sell all the cars that he made. This led to a new goal. Ford not only wanted to sell all that he could make, he also wanted to produce all the cars that he could sell. And at this point, he started mass-producing cars. In 1910, Ford moved to Highland, Michigan, north of Detroit. Ford took ideas from the watch, gun, bicycle, and meat producers and combined them to create a more efficient way of producing cars, the moving assembly line. By late 1913, Ford had created a moving assembly line for automobiles. By 1913, Ford had sold more than 250,000 models. By that year, 1916, had dropped the price of the Model T to $360. By 1918, half of all the cars sold in America were the Model T. All new cars at this point were black. Ford once wrote, "Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, as long as it is black." In 1918, Ford turned his company over to his son, Edsel. Although Henry no longer owned his company, his son Edsel would still go to him for permission before making a lot of business decisions, and Henry still had a very big part in the company. In this same year, Henry Ford started a company called Henry Ford & Son. He created this company hoping that it would scare the stockholders of Ford, and therefore they all sold their stocks and Ford was able to buy them, making the company once again family-owned. Ford continued to do good until the mid-1920s when the sales began to decline due to competition. Other car companies offered payment plans for people to buy new cars. Despite being recommended, Ford refused the idea. Ford needed a new car, and they took the project. Edsel, Henry's son, created the Ford Model A introduced in 1927 and produced through 1931. Over 4 million Model A's were sold. Around this time, Ford adopted the idea of the annual model system, or the idea of updating your car every year like they do today. One unique thing about Henry Ford is that he did not believe in accountants, and it is believed it may be why he had accumulated so much wealth. When World War I rolled around, Ford entered the aviation business. Ford's most successful aircraft was the 4AT Trimotor. This plane flew in 1926 and was the first successful U.S. passenger airplane. One thing Ford did that amazed a lot of the world for its time was introduce the $5 work day in 1914, which would equal about $120 today. Even though at the time he almost doubled many of his employees' pay, he saved lots of money by keeping employees and attracting more skilled employees working through higher pay. One of Ford's reasons behind this pay increase was also so his employees would drive his cars. If they are making more money, then they are more likely to buy Ford's cars. Ford was very against labor unions, and he felt that having unions limited a company's productivity and that they did more harm than good. Ford was the last motor company to the United Auto Workers Union. In 1941, a plant was closed due to strike, leading to the union now being used. Ford almost considered breaking up his company before bringing in unions. When World War I came around, Ford was not happy. He was not a fan of war and did all he could to stop it. Ford was a big fan of the League of Nations and supported it. Ford purchased Lincoln in 1922 because they wanted to expand into the area of luxury cars. Henry Ford's son later died in 1949 of cancer, so Ford took over the company again. Ford has invested in many different things throughout its period with us in history. They have made tractors, and that company lasted from the early 20s up until the 80s when they became Holland Tractors, invested in that company. The Mustang is probably Ford's most popular muscle car, and it is still popular today. It was first introduced in 1965. Ford has invested in many different companies over the years. Some of the companies that Ford have invested in include Aston Martin, Hertz, Mazda, Land Rover, Jaguar, and Volvo. They have either owned large stocks of or have sold companies of this in their history. Ford is probably best known for their trucks today, but it all started back with the F-100 in the 50s. Today, Ford still carries a line of many different vehicles and trucks. Today, Ford has part in electric vehicles, hydrogen, flexible fuel vehicles, natural gas. Today, Ford is one of the largest companies, and its name is recognized all over the world, all started by Henry Ford. This is my presentation on Ford Motors.